back, folks. JLam Bio here. We're going to continue our work on evolution by talking a little bit about the history of natural selection. Now, keep in mind that when we talk about evolution, we are talking about how life has changed since life began. So this is a little bit different than the first video where we talked about how life began or the scientific ideas behind the origins of life. We're now talking more about how has life changed since life began. And there's a lot more evidence for this and how life has changed over time. And we're going to dive in and look at that evidence to help understand the changes that have occurred in life over the billions of years that life has existed on Earth. So hopefully by the end of this video, you should be able to understand the history behind evolutionary theory. You should be able to explain the key concepts behind natural selection. And you'll also be able to evaluate traits that are beneficial and explain how those traits help an organism survive, reproduce, and pass those traits on to offspring. We have quite a bit of vocabulary terms in this particular unit or in this video. We're going to look at evolution, species, variation, adaptation, fitness, natural selection, artificial selection, population, and common ancestor. So lots of early ideas on evolution and how things have changed over time. So let's take a step back here and understand that evolution is the biological change in a species over time. Certain traits are altered and changed through selective pressures of nature, and the genetics of an organism changes based on what best allows them to survive. A species specifically is a group of organisms that can produce fertile offspring. So you can see here, there are lots of different ideas on how organisms change over time. All of these individuals played a really important role. So Linnaeus proposed a new system for organizing plants, animals based on similarities. Buffon discussed important ideas on relationships in organisms and how evolution might be possible. Erasmus Darwin considered how organisms could evolve through things like competition. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck gave ideas that organisms can change when the environment changes. So all of these were kind of early ideas to evolution. Not all of them exactly accurate, but gave us a good starting point to move forward. So a man by the name of Charles Darwin in 1831 spent some time on the Galapagos Islands. He noticed that there were small variations of traits in birds on that island. There were a lot of birds that were similar, but all of them had a variety of different traits. Now, these different species have developed adaptations to allow them to survive in the environment. So if you take a look here, there are finches that are fruit eaters, ones that are insect eaters, ones that eat cacti, ones that eat seeds. If all of these birds fed off of the same material, there wouldn't be enough to go around. And so the idea is that each of these individual birds kind of develop their own niche over time. That is their role in their environment, the things that they eat. We'll talk more about that when we get into our ecology unit. But all of these different birds developed beaks that allowed them to survive and live in different environments, thus not being in competition with one another. In the environment and out in nature, when competition happens, typically there is a winner and a loser. The winner survives and the loser dies. So the less competition there is, the more that all of these individuals would be able to live in harmony and be able to survive in the environment. His idea was that all of these bird species actually shared a common ancestor. That is, a finch species that is no longer living, but from which all of the other species evolved based on traits that provided an advantage. As we all know, genetics is not the same for every single bird. Some birds will have longer beaks or shorter beaks or different sized beaks. Those beaks that allowed them to eat different things and allowed them to survive are ones that are going to be passed on. If you can eat, you can live. And if you can live, you have an opportunity to reproduce and pass those traits on to your offspring. So there's a lot going on here in terms of what a common ancestor is and how that allows those organisms to be able to survive in that environment. Now, natural selection is kind of this process that those with traits best suited to the environment are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass those traits on to their offspring. Offspring varies in genetics due to meiosis, law of independent assortment, crossing over, etc. So the genetics of individual organisms is going to be different, and they're going to express different characteristics as a result of that. Those with traits that provide more of an advantage than others, those individuals will survive, reproduce, and if you have those traits, you're more likely to pass them on to your offspring. So we take a look here at resistance level. So let's say that these are bacteria. Bacteria has a wide range of resistance because the genetics of each bacteria is slightly different. So let's say that an antibiotic is then taken. Well, those that have a resistance level, a high resistance level to the antibiotic, are more likely to survive in that environment. When they reproduce, they pass those traits on to their offspring, which allow them to have a more likely chance of having that trait of high resistance. And so as you see, after selection of the final population, nearly all of the bacteria that are produced are resistant. This is the change in genetics over time. Now, this is not something that typically happens quickly. It depends on the organism. Organisms that are complex and multicellular do not reproduce quickly, so we don't see evolution very quickly in those organisms. But bacteria that can reproduce every 10 to 20 minutes, evolution occurs much faster and natural selection happens much quicker because the reproduction happens faster. Therefore, the genetics can change in a population more frequently. A real common misconception here is that individuals evolve, and that is not the case. Individuals cannot adapt or evolve. You cannot change your DNA, therefore organisms can't do that. But a species, over time, the genetics within a species can shift one direction or another. That's kind of that concept of natural selection. Those with traits best suited to the environment are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass those traits on to their offspring. Thus, the genes in a population shift and we see a change in a species over time. So in this example here, number one, we have mice that are two different coat colors. There's some that are white and some that are gray. A bird comes along and is able to see those that are white, but the ones that are gray provide camouflage. So the bird will be able to eat the ones that are white. That is not an advantageous trait, but being gray is, because it is avoiding the bird. Therefore, that provides an advantage. They're more likely to survive, reproduce, and gray mice are more likely to have offspring that are gray. And so you see that over a period of time. The concept of fitness is something that is discussed as well, and I'm not talking about going to the gym. Gym. Let's make that our word of the video, so make sure you write that down. Gym. Lifting weights. Jalen Bio. Anyways, fitness is the ability to survive and reproduce in the environment. Advantageous traits are based on the environment. So if the environment changes, so do the traits that are beneficial. So if we have a drastic shift in the environment, maybe the camouflaged mice from the previous example won't be camouflaged anymore. Maybe a different coat color or pattern will provide better camouflage. Keep in mind that individuals do not evolve, populations do. So it really is about the species and how the genetics within the species changes over time, not the individual. Now, we can take advantage of this. So for example, artificial selection. Humans determine what genes are best suited for survival. So if we take a look at the example here, corn and farming is an excellent example of this. Farmers buy seed from companies that ensure that they get high yield. They get the most crops that they could possibly get. And so over time, they have taken the plants that produce the most yield, produce the most crops, and then they breed them together to produce offspring that will produce a lot of corn. Dogs is an example of this too. Different breeds of dogs, all domestic dogs are the same species, but we've altered them over time. We select the traits that we want out of those dogs, and thus we have a variety of different breeds of dog, yet them all being the same species. So kind of keep that in mind that humans can control natural selection as well. We just call it artificial selection because humans determine what traits are beneficial. So there's a lot that's going on here, and one of the major mechanisms for evolution is natural selection. Those with traits best suited to the environment are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass those traits on to their offspring. And advantageous traits are based on the environment of the organism. Lots going on here. We'll talk a lot more about natural selection here in class coming up over the next couple days. So hope you guys have a great day. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.